Thank you so much. I wanted to take an opportunity to welcome you tonight to an evening of reconciliation, keynote, and conversation with Chief Dr. Robert Joseph. It'll graciously be moderated by Winnie Korn-Miller. My name is Karen Joseph. I am the CEO of Reconciliation Canada, and we're really proud to be one of the people hosting this evening. I'm also happen to be the eldest daughter of Chief Dr. Robert Joseph, so that's probably my bigger claim to fame than anything else. I am honored to be here tonight. The energy in the room is palpable. We're really excited to have so much diversity in the room, so much representation from all different sectors of Canadian society, and really that's for us what reconciliation is all about. It's going to take all of us to move this country forward in a new way, and the only way we're going to be able to do that is with you. So thank you very much for joining us this evening. Before we begin, I would like to honor and acknowledge the traditional territories of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Musqueam people, and really lift my hands in thanks and praise for allowing us to do this important work on their territories, for the graciousness of their hosting, all of the time being present for us and guiding us through the work that we're doing. And with that, I would like to introduce Siamtanat, Cheryl Rivers, to welcome us to the territories and provide a blessing. Cheryl is a member of the Squamish Nation and a recent graduate of the SFU Executive MBA in Aboriginal Business and Leadership. So, Cheryl, welcome.
Hoichach tanoi siam CI enagoital. An hat squalo in tiet stace. Hoichach che siam, hoichach chisha tameoch, hoichach siam, and hoichach slanite stamps. Good evening. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm actually just filling in the shoes for my mother, Audrey Rivers, who unfortunately became very ill with bronchitis, so she's at home. So as my brother likes to call me, Little Audrey, I'm filling in her shoes, graciously too. And so it's an honor to be here this evening to welcome you to the Squamish Tsleil-Waututh. I thank our relatives and elders from Tsleil-Waututh that are here and from the Musqueam territories. I came across on the modern canoe of the sea bus to get here. I love the modern canoe. I love traditional canoes too. I also paddle in the traditional ocean-going canoes on journeys, so it's a nice context from traditional to modern. And I also just like to share that I'm really feeling a genuine and sincere feeling from different levels of government and different people from Canada and BC and in reconciliation. And there's been a lot of dialogues that I've been involved with in the past month, especially. And I've sat where ministers have sat and listened all day for missing and murdered Aboriginal women. And a lot is being referenced about Reconciliation Canada and the work that's being done all across Canada for not only the Aboriginal people, but the Métis and the Inuit as well. And so I'd like to say congratulations to CM Chief Robert Joseph for all the work that you do. And I know you've been honored with many medals, and you're going to be honored with the Inspire Awards coming up in a few weeks. I really want to congratulate you for the hard work and the dedication that you've done to get this to where it is today. I'm sure you probably didn't imagine it would be as big as it is and what it's accomplished. So I lift my hands up to you for all that you've done for all of us. And then I want to say thank you to Slanite Stamps, Winnie Korn-Miller. She made this beautiful shawl for me. She just presented it to me before we started today, and we've known each other since we ran across Canada in 1991 together. We were running partners, and she's making these and giving them to women warriors who have influenced her in her life, and asked me that I do work to help Aboriginal women and continue being a woman warrior. So I want to thank you in public for the work that you've prepared to cover me up and protect me with your love. So with that, I'd like to continue on and say have a great evening and enjoy the dialogue. Hosiam. Okay.
Thank you, Sam Tanat, for your kind words and your thoughts that you put into opening us up in a good way tonight. I think our cultures and our traditions and our sharings are the gift that we as Indigenous people bring to Canada. The gift that we bring to this conversation around reconciliation is acknowledging those traditions and acknowledging those ways of being that have guided us for generations. And so for us to start with a prayer and to start with an opening that recognizes the traditional territories that we're on is critical to showing respect for ourselves, for our hosts, for one another. And so I sincerely appreciate your joining us here this evening and opening us up in a good way. With that, I'd like to invite Am Johal, the director of Vancity, the SFU's Vancity Office of Community Engagement, to come up and open up with a few words.
Good evening, everyone, and also all of you watching at home on the webcast. And thank you, Karen and Cheryl, for that wonderful welcome. I also wanted to acknowledge that we're on the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. I wanted to thank our partners, Janet Weber from SFU Public Square, who's here, Kirk Hill from the Beedie School of Business, and of course Vancity as well, who supports the work of my office as well as Reconciliation Canada. Back in June, when the interim recommendations came out, this is where Reconciliation Canada organized a local response to it. So it's great to have you back here in this space. And we really have good vibes tonight in the building because the Push Festival is opening tonight. And the show is Jack Charles versus the Crown, which is a theater piece from Australia talking about the situation of stolen children there. So that's actually at 8 o'clock tonight. And following the discussion this evening, there will be a reception on the ground floor, and the O'Dane Gallery has opened their doors tonight. There's a show by Indigenous artist Dana Claxton that you'll be able to see as well. I'm here to mostly introduce our moderator, Wanique Horn-Miller, who I just met earlier this evening. Wanique is a Mohawk Bear Clan woman and mother. She works and travels extensively throughout the Indigenous world. Through her work as a sports commentator for CBC and APTN, she's become a community advocate for sport, fitness, and wellness, and she's traveled extensively throughout North America as a motivational speaker. As one of Canada's few Indigenous Olympians, Wanique has used her passion and experiences in sport to influence Indigenous and non-Indigenous leadership towards making sport and wellness a community-building priority. She's currently a brand ambassador for Manitoba Mucklucks, an Indigenous-owned and operated footwear company. And Wanique is also one of the newest ambassadors of Reconciliation Canada. So please join me in welcoming Wanique.
I wanted to say what an honor it is to be here and to be, introduced by an old friend. It was. We were talking about how long me and Cheryl have known each other. I was 15 and she was 22 when we ran across Canada, and I'm still surprised my mom ever let me go on that run. I think I survived it, and who knew? I need to traditionally introduce myself properly with my whole name. I wouldn't expect you to do that because it's a long name. So my full name is Wanique Garakwinunta Onat Garagete Sunshine Horn-Miller. And I'm a Bear Clan woman from the Mohawk Nation of Ganawage, as well as Ashwegan, which is near Six Nations. And we're a matrilineal people, and I'm very proud to be a Mohawk woman. And I remember asking, my grandmother, and my grandmother is she was one of these women who always. Anybody have a grandmother? You never know if they're telling the truth. There's always a joke somewhere in everything they say. And I remember asking her when I was about 14, I don't know, dawned on me to ask her this question of, why are we matrilineal? Like, you go to other Indigenous nations, it's patrilineal. They follow their father's line. Out here quite a bit too. And she says, well, Monique, you always can be 100% sure who your mother is, but you're never 100% sure who your father is. And I looked at her and went, oh, Ma, Dada. I said, is that true? No, but your grandfather's your grandfather. I'm like, okay. So I'm so honored to be here and part of Reconciliation Canada. It came into my life at a very fortuitous time. It's just weird how things are meeting Karen and to be part of this movement. It just seems right. It seems that at this point in my life, where I should be is right here. And how often do you get that chance to say, there's no other place I should be but here at this moment and part of this? And to get the incredible honor to introduce this, like, someone I've grown up hearing about. He even mentioned that he knew my mom back in the 60s. And remembers my mom, this Mohawk woman that used to, knock heads and take names back in the 60s. And I think to myself, what a different time that was. My mother and Chief Joseph being born in a time when you needed a pass to leave the reserve. My mother, they couldn't vote. You couldn't get a university degree, or you became disenfranchised. So it was a really different world. And then even the world I was born in 1975, being born into a world where, there was a lot of racism. And having a name like Wanique was a curse. Let me tell you, going to school where there was no other Native people, and to try to be proud of that name and to be proud of that lineage and everything. We have come so far. And I think the path they had to walk for us to get here, it was not just a path, it was a battle. And we are so lucky to be able to follow and to have a path to follow. So, Chief Joseph, he's the hereditary chief, and I apologize. I can do Mohawk words up the yin yang, but out here it just slays me to say it, so I apologize if I mispronounce. He is the hereditary chief of the Gwakwaneuk First Nation, who has dedicated his life to bridging the difference brought around by intolerance, lack of understanding, and racism at home and abroad. As one of the last few speakers of the I'm sorry. I'll get it. I will become an expert. Language. Chief Joseph is an eloquent and inspiring ceremonial house speaker. He is currently the ambassador for Reconciliation Canada, a member of the National Assembly of First Nations Elders Council, and an honorary witness to Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Commission. He has served as the executive director of the Indian Residential School Survivors Society, as chairman of the Native American Leadership Alliance for Peace and Reconciliation, and ambassador for Peace and Reconciliation with the Interreligious and International Federation for World Peace. Chief Joseph has sat with world leaders and learned and shared from them with his understanding of faith, hope, healing, and reconciliation. Chief Joseph has received an honorary doctorate of law from the University of British Columbia and an honorary doctorate of divinity from Vancouver School of Theology. In 2014, Chief Joseph received the Jack P. Blaney Award for Dialogue from the Center for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. And in 2015, he was appointed to the Order of British Columbia. And as we heard before, he's about to get an Inspire Award for a Lifetime Achievement. Please welcome Chief Joseph.
Greetings, all my relatives. Nimwiyut. We are all one. That's what we believe in Reconciliation Canada. And of course, what we believe among the Kwakwaka'wakw, and it's similar to the phrase, all my relations. And for some reason, we as people who inhabit this place have forgotten the idea that we are all one. We seem to have a penchant for hurting each other, marginalizing each other, putting each other down, and we pay no heed to the suffering that results from that perspective about who we are. So I always, when I get the privilege to speak to people like yourselves, thank you, by the way, for coming this evening. I always, before I get to see the sea of faces, wonder, who are you? Who are we in this room? And I think that's a question that we're going to be asking a lot. Canada's going to be asking a lot about who we are as a Canadian family, as one with a sordid, hurtful, broken, dark, shared history. And tonight, everybody in this room came because somehow we recognize our failings. Somehow we have an idea that we should do better. And that's why when I see you, I'm deeply inspired and I become hopeful that we in this room, starting here, can begin to change not only our communities, not only this country, but the entire world. We have to believe that we can do that. When I look around the globe and I see the strife and I see the suffering and the brutality, I think that it's time that we all stood up for goodness, for each other. It doesn't matter where we come from, or the color of our skin, or what language we speak, or what gender we are. We have to find a way to do better. That's what this evening is all about. And I'm so happy I see my friends in the front row, the elders. Thank you for coming. Sometimes I think, what am I doing? Is anybody listening? Does anybody care? And I see you, and it inspires me to continue. Somebody somehow has to say to me, you're on the right track. It's good what you're doing. And if I don't see that, sometimes I get afraid. I try to be courageous every day. I try to think that the message that we all want to embrace is one that says all of us have value. Every last one of you in this room and those who aren't in this room tonight. That all of us have a God-given right to seek our purpose in life, to ponder the great mysteries, not in an academic way, but to ponder why we're here, why you're here. I think that in our being here, there is a greater, higher, divine purpose that's been set out for us long before we ever got to these places of brokenness and despair and harm and hurt and loss and grief. And the mystery is in trying to find the answers for those things that plague us. Justice, inequality, injustice rather. Marginalization, creating silos between all of us. In Canada, this day, this moment, this year, this time, we have the greatest opportunity ever in the history of this country to create a society unlike any we've seen before, one that's much gentler and softer and full of love. A little while back now, maybe it's 2 decades now, a little more, we started hearing this narrative about Indian residential schools. And I was in a school for 11 years. I know that narrative personally, experienced that narrative personally. And I came out at the end of my experience feeling like nothing. I grew up telling myself that I am nothing. No future, no dreams. And it's a hard place to be. And then I think about this opportunity that I get to come and talk to you all. You don't know how important that is to me. Just to reaffirm my own humanity. You come tonight and you lift my soul. And I think there is absolute possibility for reconciliation in Canada. In June, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada tabled its final report, and I was in Ottawa when they tabled that report. There were thousands of us in this room, 4,000 or 5,000. Most of us were people who had attended these residential schools and had these experiences that have plagued us all our lives. And Justice Murray Sinclair began to read the report, and it was like this, silent anticipation. I was so happy. I was so relieved that there would finally be a formal narrative about our brokenness together and some acknowledgement of my own personal harm and pain. And I remember when the Justice Murray Sinclair recited the litany of things that Canada had done to our people, Aboriginal people, he said, "Canada, you have done all of this." And then he called it cultural genocide. The whole room erupted. The only person that didn't express any joy or emotional response was the Minister of Indian Affairs. And I looked around and everybody was hooting and hollering and stomping their feet. And I'm like that. I felt sorry for the only guy that didn't get up. I thought, oh my God, what a place to be in this moment, in this second, and 5,000 hooting and hollering people celebrating and exhibiting some joy, and one person sits there, and I thought, oh gee, I would never want to be in that position. And it was euphoric. But when the dust settled, on my personal experience now, and I thought about what the commissioner had characterized our country as one that had effected genocide, cultural genocide on Aboriginal people, a sadness descended over me. Because here's one of the things I know, that we, all of us here, all Canadians, all Aboriginal people are here to stay. And somehow we got to work out that history together, work out that past together, and create an understanding that'll move us forward. So it's sort of a bittersweet moment for me thinking about all of that, the report, the history. You know what was funny? That in a subsequent poll, 7 out of 10 Canadians agreed with the characterization. And from there, I began to see some light again. If 7 out of 10 agreed, they also said, the 7 out of 10, that they wanted to reconcile with former students. And then I began to recognize the deep, the great promise that all of this is bringing to us. This is the moment, Canada, Canadians, Vancouverites, this is the moment for us to consider deeply who we are and what we want to be. Where do we want to go together? I can't think of anything more exciting than that. I could have chosen personally, individually, to stay in my misery and anger and resentment and hatred and brokenness and despair. I could have stayed there. But I didn't want to do that anymore. I knew absolutely that if I continued to do that, if I continued to be defined by that period, that I would never be free, ever, ever. Were some of you at that big walk 2 or 3 years ago in Vancouver? And Dr. Bernice King was there, remember? She made a beautiful speech. She said, and I'm going to paraphrase her, I guess, freedom is never really won or lost. Freedom is never really won or lost. Every generation has to struggle for its own freedom. So you know what that says to us, right? That forever we in this room and others who aren't here have to be diligent to make sure that we always care for each other. Like the Coast Salish people say, I really love it. They say, hold each other up. And I know we're going to do it in this country now. And when I think about that idea and I think about the diversity in this great city of ours, people are here from everywhere on earth, every race, every color, every creed, and the diversity is there. And we've got to cradle it. We've got to cradle it. We've got to nurture it, care for each other. And I think that the whole idea of multiculturalism will have a different meaning. It will mean that we as people, human beings living here, will hold up to our highest selves the way we live out our lives. We don't do that often enough. And so, you know what? I have a great deal of hope and optimism. And I'm so happy, I was so honored to be introduced by this beautiful young lady because it seems so appropriate. Here's an old guy who's lived this time, did mostly everything I wanted to try to do to change things. And here's a beautiful young person who cares about this present moment and the days and years to come. And I think there are lots of young Canadians in this country who are exactly like that, who desire something different than some of the situations that we've experienced in the past. So, who are we in this room? Who are you? What is it that you can do to bring about this peace and harmony, compassion? Everybody in this room can give that. Everybody. That's one thing I know about reconciliation, that it's an inside job, first of all. That what you've got to do is reconcile yourself. And I gave a definition to some friends of mine earlier today, and I said that reconciliation meant peace within. And then I said the additional definition of that was peace within and love throughout. Isn't that noble, the idea? And we can all do it without government, without anything else. Just you, right here, this moment, embracing the idea that reconciliation is a worthy pursuit. Find that peace inside and love throughout. I know reconciliation can become very academic, very complicated. And it is academic and very complicated. But we should never preempt we who aren't academic or intellectual, or who only think in simple terms. We should never preempt ourselves from the idea that we can be involved. Actually, I think the most important reconciliation will be the one you engage in with yourself personally, where you live, at home, with the family, and then it works itself outward. So we've had a commission now going around the country, and it's wrapped up its work after about 7 years and a little bit. It's quite a voluminous report, and it has 94 recommendations. And I want to thank those commissioners for all the work they've done. I can't imagine the sacrifice they made 6-7 years on the road, in the hotels. Thank God for them. So they put this report together. It's our roadmap now. There's something in that report for everybody in this room. If you're an educator or a politician or other, there's something in that report that can guide us. And I think we have a ready-made roadmap to make this one of the greatest countries on earth, the best citizens everywhere. And I think we can be a model to the world about how we should treat each other, how we should look after each other, how we should care for each other. We're so privileged in this time to be here, to recognize that even though we have the sordid, broken, dark history, that we have the opportunity to turn it around. I've been privileged to speak to so many people. People in high places, low places, little people, big people, rich people, poor people, us people. And I haven't found very many naysayers. Everybody seems to agree that this is the time and that we should engage ourselves in beginning to elevate our humanity, our consciousness, to live out our ways with tenderness and looking after each other. I'm so thrilled to be here this moment. I keep thinking, and I hear people all the time, oh, it's going to take a long time. And I imagine it will, but it's already started. There are all kinds of initiatives across the country that are being conducted in the name of reconciliation, and people are creating new relationships with each other everywhere. I've talked to people in the boardrooms, most of the boardrooms, I think, in this downtown area, and some across the country. I've sat with deputy ministers and executive directors of organizations in the development field, and everybody is listening. Most people are wanting to try to do something different. You know what my biggest fear is? If we're too cynical and we're too closed-minded to embrace the idea that even those we have considered to be in opposition, sometimes as enemies or sometimes as opposing forces, if we don't begin to listen to them and they begin to listen to us, we'll never get to that place where we all want to go, where everybody in this country, every child born, has the same opportunity to grow up and be valued, to dream dreams. That's what we're working for, really, is that idea that everybody here can share the prosperity of this wealthy land. There are so many things that we can do. And everybody in this room, you can find something to do. It's as simple as this, and I'm just using it for an example. You, right now, tonight, when you go home, could think about it, and you create a little back pocket reconciliation plan. Back pocket reconciliation plan. What would that mean? Well, it might mean you would look me in an eye. You've never looked me in the eye before. It might mean you extend your hand and say, how do you do? You've never done that with me before. It might mean many things, but everything, those little steps are in your power to do that. Create those back pocket reconciliation plans on a daily basis. Wake up in the morning and say, you know what, I'm going to be positive. I'm going to inspire others around me to be positive and to be hopeful. The other thing that I think is really important to do, we all come from different walks of life. We work at different things. Some are teachers, others. In those places we work, we could begin to create a lens of reconciliation. How do we exercise reconciliation in our work environment? And we can work at that. Some of it might be changing policy, shifting policy. There are so many things we can do. That's the real point. I'm really trying to leave you with the idea that it's up to you, and you can do those things. Begin changing this world little by little. Pretty soon it's going to be a tsunami of change. Imagine a world where everybody cared for each other. Imagine a world where every little kid could dream about being somebody. Maybe a hockey player or anything. Imagine a world where everybody felt respected. It would be beautiful. I think that we have much to learn from the past. And it's done now. The past is done. We're all struggling with it. We're all trying to resolve the fallout from it. But the better idea is this, that we should, all of us, looking forward, create a vision together about our future. We can do that. Nobody else actually can do that. And so I ask you this evening to make reconciliation a life way for you individually. And I think I can guarantee you, if all and everything else failed and you made it a life way for you, you'd be a happier person, right? So I want to thank all of you for coming out tonight and listening. Obviously, you care, and I thank you for that. I hope that moving forward in the days and weeks and months to come, that you will apply yourselves, your energy, your insight, your perspective, your heart, soul, and mind to the idea that we are Namyut, that we are one. I just say again, thank you so much for being here this evening. And that's all I have to say. That's how we see it in our culture. Thank you.
Wow. You could hear a pin drop in here. That's pretty incredible. What I hear is your words. It comes from a lot of experience and a lot of reconciliation in yourself. And the question always comes to mind when I see people who have gotten to sort of this place of peace and this place of just serenity. Like when I was sitting back in the green room, I don't know how many people came through to give you a hug. And then I sat here and just people came by, give you a hug. I'm like, you're a rock star, you got groupies, and everybody wants a piece of that, right? They're like, and it's young, old, all walks of life. It's just this. And so the question that I always ask is, what inspired? Like you said, you came from a place of pain. You were in anger. Was there a specific moment that inspired that change? There was a moment where you said, enough. And do you remember what that was like?
Yes, there was a real moment, a divine moment. As a result of my experience in that school for 11 years, I left her absolutely broken, and I soon sank into a life of alcoholism. I held on to some steady jobs that were fairly good. Had a family. My daughters are here with me this evening. It was a distinct thought that I had leaving that school that I would never be lonely again once I left her if I got married and I had lots of kids. So I got married and had lots of kids, 5 of them, 2 of them right here. And I didn't know that you're supposed to nurture, take care of your relationship with your other spouse. I didn't know that you had to know something about being a parent. It didn't take long until I really spiraled out of control. And very soon I wasn't working. Hydro came to turn the power off in my house. Central Mortgage was starting to call. And I really, really then sank deeper into my despair. I don't know how I was able to manage that because I wasn't working anymore, but I always managed to get drunk every day. I was going to say pissed. But one day a friend of mine said to me, he said, Bobby Joe, everybody calls me Bobby Joe. Bobby Joe, I don't like what you're doing to yourself. Why don't you come fishing with me for a day? Get out of here. And I was in so much pain and despair. I knew I was in trouble. I said, okay, I'll come. So I went down to that boat, and early the next morning, I don't remember how I got to the boat, but I woke up on that boat early the next morning, and I looked around, and you know when you've been drinking so much, the moment you wake up, all of that darkness comes over you, the cloud of despair. And I looked around, and I got out of the bunk of the boat, and all the other people were sleeping, and I tiptoed out of the engine room because I was so ashamed of myself. And I went through to the back of the boat, and there were no other boats around, and there was no other human being in my sight. And I just broke down. I said, God, help me, and I fell on my knees. It wasn't really a prayer because I was so angry at God at that time. But as I knelt there, I began to see through my tears. They were just pouring. And I looked over the gunwale of the boat, and I saw Johnson Street. It's a huge body of water. I've never seen a body of water so powerful and beautiful. It had ripples in there and lightning bolts. And I continued to elevate my gaze, and I saw the forest on the other side of the channel, and the whole forest was full of lightning and energy and lush and green. And finally, I was looking up. And as I looked up, I saw the entire universe. Really beautiful, incomprehensible universe. And then I heard this voice that said to me, in spite of what you've done to yourself, I love you, and you're a part of all of this. And suddenly I was back to the moment. I was that broken down, sad, tragic figure. And so we fished, and we went back to Cam River, and I bumped some money off the crew, used my last bit of burl cream, and went straight to the bar. And I found the darkest corner in that bar, and I said to the bartender when he came, the waiter, fill her up. I was pretty brave again, confident again, right? And I drank, and I drank, and I drank. And suddenly my table was empty. I had drunk or whatever. All of that booze, and it was lots too. So I hollered at him again, and said, fill up my table again. And I tried to get that, past that pain. I drank and drank and drank. And it was close to closing time, maybe 1 a.m. And I said, holy crow, I'm still sober. And I sat there and I couldn't figure it out. So finally I pushed myself away from the table and I walked home to my home. It wasn't far from the center of town. And I lay down, and it wasn't like the other nights. I used to try to hear the pitter-patter of my kids, although they were gone. They were all little. I used to try and listen for my wife's footsteps coming up our garage. But this night I lay down and I just fell asleep, woke up the next morning. It was so peaceful. And that was the first time that I knew, even with divine help, that we can change. That somehow we can reconcile those things that are most challenging to us. Eventually, I came to work for the Indian Residential School Survivors Society. This is at the front end of all of this new narrative evolving about the legacy of residential schools. And I had the privilege of working with survivors across the province and in this country. We held all kind of dialogue circles. And there was one thing that was consistent that was said in all those circles. All of those people wanted to tell their stories. It had been pent up so long in us. We were so ashamed of that history and that past. And suddenly we discovered that we could create space that would allow us to tell our story. Safe space, sacred space. And then the real narrative of residential schools began to explode into our consciousness. And then there was a national dialogue created by the federal government, and this is where I began even more to recognize that reconciliation was a possibility. There were 7 national dialogues across the country, and I attended them. In the earliest ones, we sat across the table and cursed each other and pounded on the tables and threatened each other. But as we moved across the country, the tone changed. Suddenly, people were forgiving each other, apologizing to each other, embracing each other, and tears flowing. I thought, oh my God, I've not seen this before. And I knew then that if we had these places where people could tell their stories, and then further, that we could tell our stories to each other, that we could weave some kind of human connection between all of us that would allow us to think beyond the brokenness about who we were together, that we needed each other. We absolutely need each other, by the way. If we're going to reconcile this country, it can't be the Aboriginals on their own, or it can't be non-Aboriginals on their own. We need each other. And everybody's going to be so important in the process. I had a granny, she was my most favorite human being. She's gone a long time now. And she used to say, my precious one, I am nothing without you. And that's the way I feel about us. We are less without each other. So when you leave this place this evening and you reflect a little bit about our time together, know that you're needed and you should be a part of something noble, like we elevating ourselves to our highest consciousness.
I come from just a little slightly different generation, and when all this talk started happening about reconciliation, I know I'm not the only one. Like a lot of my Indigenous friends, we talked about it, and it was this new word, and what did it mean? And I think back to when I first started on my own journey to reconciliation. So my mother's from Ganawage, and that's where I was predominantly raised. Single mom. She raised me and my sisters on her own. And my father's from Six Nations. And he's a very well-educated man, and very tumultuous relationship. And I grew up a young woman, very angry because of this relationship with my father. And, I was so thankful to have a mother that was so strong. And she ruled our house like a general, and she saved her pennies, and she made 2 decisions in our lives. And I think about reconciliation, where it started was that decision for us, was she said, I don't know how you will turn out, but I know I have control over 2 things. 1, no drugs and alcohol were allowed in our home. And not even, my mom was like an anti-smoker when everybody smoked, right? So she wouldn't even let anybody smoke on her property. And she put us into sports. And she chose sports for us that were non-judged sports. So running and swimming is what she chose for us, because she didn't want our nativeness to get in the way. And she moved us from Ganawage to Ottawa, and she moved us kitty corner from the YMCA. And she saved every penny, and she put us in everything in the Y. And from that decision, my oldest sister is a medical doctor, graduate of UBC. My other sister is a professor of anthropology at Carleton University. I went to the Olympics, and my little sister became an award-winning actor. But, I realized, all through our journey, we all carried a little bit of this anger. There was something. And it wasn't until the day came when the apology, do you remember when the apology happened? And I'm a big CBC TV watcher. So I'm looking at it, I'm watching the news. And how many of you guys remember that apology? Do you remember watching that on television? And I'm sitting there, and I had not spoken to my father in a long time. And there he was, sitting on Parliament Hill, listening to the apology. And I called my sister up and I said, "What's Dad doing there?" And she goes, "I don't know what he's doing there, call him." And so I called him up, hadn't spoken to him in a lot of years. I said, "What were you doing at the apology?" I called him. He goes, "Oh, I went to residential school." And it was like all these puzzle pieces fell in line. Why he could never hold us. Why he could never tell us he loved us. Why he just had such an uncomfortable feeling around us. And that I think, and this is the saddest thing I've heard from a lot of friends of mine whose parents went to residential school, he figured that we were better off without him in our lives. That we would be healthier, that we would be safer. So reconciliation, I think, is an ongoing process. You are way farther ahead than I feel a lot of people are. I think a lot of young Indigenous people are coming to understand what that means for them. But as a child of a residential school survivor, I feel like there's no place for us to speak. And we need to make a place for us to speak because we grieve a lot and we don't even know what to do with that. So, we're talking about reconciliation and I just wanted to share that, like, it's a process and we're not, and you're like, if I could say it, you'd be like the 7th Dan black belt of reconciliation. That's where I want to get. And I'll get there. I'm still like I'm a white belt, maybe a yellow belt, but I'll get there. I wanted to ask you, so there's a lot of really cool things going on across Canada. What is like one example of an inspiring example of reconciliation that you can tell us about?
Yeah, I think at the beginning of this residential school odyssey, this unfolding story, there were attempts at the very front end to at least bring church people and survivors together. It had never been done, and there was a lot of pain expressed in hatred sometimes. But it was always in some way transformative for people to be able to say to each other what they were feeling and thinking, and could ask the question, why did your church do that? Or whatever questions that needed to be asked. And I think the most important thing about reconciliation is that it brings about individual, personal transformation of thought, and idea, and behavior eventually. And I don't think we can preempt that from all of the reconciliation process. There are a lot of things that are clinical in nature about reconciliation, but the most important thing in my mind is the reconciliation that takes place between us, between your heart and my heart. And if we begin to do that, we're going to resolve all those big issues. And I think the reason why I'm really in favor of reconciliation, even though we're still in lots of pain and not much justice has prevailed yet, and they still haven't resolved rights and title things, I think the real important idea behind reconciliation is that while we're working toward that legal agreement or rights and title agreement, we should be talking to each other and transforming how we see each other. So that when we do reach those agreements, there will be a new kind of covenant, deeper than signing ink on a paper or anything. Be a spiritual covenant, right? And I think that's how Canada is going to change, because we see this new relationship between us as not a political agreement or a protocol agreement or legal agreement. It's because we learn basically to respect and honor each other and love each other in some cases.
It's when creating that relationship, and it's interesting. It's a relationship. It's trust, and I wanted I got this opportunity last summer. I got to be the deputy chef de mission for Team Canada at the Pan American Games in Toronto. And I remember when I was asked, I had a very tumultuous relationship in my sports career. When I went to the Olympics, I was the only Native person from Canada, the United States. We did have a Paralympian that was actually from out here and go to the Paralympic Games that year. And I faced a lot of intolerance, and I faced a sport world that was they weren't ready for me, and they weren't ready for what I stood for. And so when I left sport, I left with a bad taste in my mouth. I was angry. I felt that, if you take a good look at Team Canada, if you take a look at our Olympic team, I don't believe that diversity reflects that of the diversity of Canada, and we still have a lot of work to do with creating opportunities. And so when I got this chance, I was called up by Kurt Harnett, who was one of my idols growing up in sport. And I thought to myself, leading up, I said, so what can I do here? The 800 athletes are going to be going to the Pan Am Games. This is the biggest games, multi-sport games that we're going to see in Canada. It's on my traditional territory, which Six Nations in Toronto is considered, well, we could fight it out with the Mississaugas and everybody else. But if you talk to my mom, it's Iroquois territory. Anyway, so I remember I said to my mom, I said, what can I do to bring my culture? And so I thought about when I went to the Olympic Games, before we left for the Olympics, I gave each of my teammates a tobacco pouch, and I brought them out to my community. We had a small ceremony, like what we used to do to go to battle. And then we headed off to the Olympics. So me and a few friends of mine, actually, Wanda Brocape Peters is here, we made 800 tobacco pouches for all 800 athletes. And and as you can see, I really like my bling. I like my bling. I wear a lot of bling. And we got given these very special pins. And it was funny because the chef de mission gave me these pins. Okay, you got to hand these out. And instead of handing them out, I went and gave them to a woman named Roberta Anderson, and this is her sister Wanda. And they're both from Gordon's First Nations. They both went to residential school. And they beaded medallions. And so what I did was each team that came in, so each like basketball, soccer came in, badminton, I traditionally welcomed them to my territory, and I talked to them about what they were there for. And I talked to them about their legacy, and I talked to them I said, I'm not here to tell you to win. I am here to tell you to make people remember you. And I'm here to say that 7 generations in the future, there's going to be one of your descendants is going to need courage, is going to need inspiration, and their parents are going to tell them what you did here at the Pan Am Games. And I talked to them about leaving their mark at these games and what the potential they had. These athletes, and I just talked to them about their lineage, and in a different language that we often hear, we talk about our hereditary chiefs, we talk about our ancestors, and a lot of these athletes had never heard that. And then a lot of them were crying when they walked out of that meeting, these meetings, and when I would go out to their venues, I'd be like sitting in the stands and they'd be getting their gold medals. These are like Olympic rowers, baseball players, like multi-million-dollar baseball players, and they're yelling at me, collecting their gold medals, and they're pulling out their tobacco pouches. And I was like, oh my goodness. But the coolest thing that happened, well, 2 coolest things. So before we headed, did anybody watch the opening ceremonies? It had the Cirque du Soleil, and it was amazing. So before you head into the opening ceremonies, it's customary for the chef de missions to give a big speech. And it's usually, have fun, live the moment, go Team Canada, right? But I had told Kurt Harnett, I said, this is my chance to give, everybody seen the movie 300? To give my 300 speech. So I wrote this speech, and I told them, I said, in my culture, only the women can declare war. So part of I said, and you should hear all the women went, 300 women going crazy, right? And then I talked about, I said, and I'm officially, and I said my whole traditional name, I'm declaring war on Panamania. They went nuts, like they just went crazy, and I said, let's get out there. And it was like a dream come true for me to inject this something inside of me, this passion, this spirit, this something into this team. And those medallions that I gave them to the flag bearers. And Greg Oldershaw, he's a kayaker. I went out and I gave him this medallion, beaded by Roberta Anderson. And I went and in front of his whole team, kayak team, and I said, this is made by a woman who is a grandmother, residential school survivor. And before your race, if you're looking for courage, just think about her. She defines courage. And, in my own way, it was a chance of reconciliation. It was a chance, and in a way, like what I was hoping to do with those 800 athletes and their coaches and their, on all the staff, the 1,000 people that made up Team Canada was, rather than when I stepped into the elite sports system and everybody saw a Native athlete and went, oh, you're one of those. You're a quitter. You're not as smart. You guys have lots of talents, but you never stick it out. All the negative stereotypes. I wanted them, the next Native person that came across their path, they go, I remember that Wanique. She was awesome. Maybe you're a little bit like that. That's, in my mind, it was a little bit of reconciliation in my own way to see us as a source of inspiration. Shirley Chichu is a residential school survivor from Moose Factory. She's a filmmaker. And she told me something that I never forgot. In Winnipeg, she said, I am not a residential school survivor. I'm a residential school warrior. And I promised myself to always call all of you warriors because it's such a word of action. And you do definitely embody a perseverance. Mm-hmm. And Canada, if we were to have the ultimate, you guys know about the Haka and the Maoris in New Zealand. These guys embody more power in their experience to inspire this country. And we have just a couple minutes left, and I definitely want to give you the last word. Why, as so many Indigenous people are living in difficult situations, why is it, and this is a question that was given to me to give to you, why is it important to work on reconciliation when there is so much, what can you tell everybody in here to not feel like it's a tsunami of work?
I think ultimately, I know that most of you in this room probably are supporters, converted, caring people, want to be helpful, advocates. And I think to myself, that is so important. Because without you, it would have been even harder to be here this day without experiencing the hearts and minds and spirits of the people here in this room. And we know that there's so much to be done yet to achieve. If you compare reconciliation to those big initiatives that need to be conducted and completed around rights and title, improved educational standards, parity, whatever it is. But I think we're going to get there quicker if we start the discussion on the basis that we need each other right now and that we're going to move forward and elevate the conditions of Aboriginal people, we're going to do it because we agree with each other and that it's the right thing to do. If we wait, it might be a very, very long time to wait until there's a tick-off list that says, oh yeah, we've got some degree or semblance or volume of reconciliation, achievement, let's reconcile. Like reconciliation has to start from that place of brokenness. It really does. It has to start from that place where we're divided, where we're different, where we're marginalized. And if we start from that place, then we're creating transformation. I don't think the kind of transformation we need in this country won't happen as a result of agreements or protocol. I don't know what the words are. It's only going to happen in a real way if it's sort of a heart-to-heart, one person at a time, doing what it is that we can do where we are. Like that reconciliation you just determined. I think all of us really need to hear what Wanique said. And she characterized what she did as her way. And I think you said in your own small way. We've all got to start there. That's going to ignite the light, so to speak. And then as we grow together and we begin to network and advocate for each other and support each other, those big things will begin to evolve. And when we get there, to whatever degree and volume we get, it's going to be enshrined by the goodness of our hearts, not by some law, British common law or whatever it is, but it's going to be enshrined and embedded in the love that we have for each other. If reconciliation sometimes gets too complicated in our minds, just think about that. It's really about love, ultimately. That's what it is, and we use that as a guiding light to all of the efforts we're going to make.
You know, just to sum up what you just said, it was something my mother told me about human rights. She said she raised us to be very aware, of all human rights. She's like, you don't pick and choose which human rights you respect and which ones you don't respect. So she's, raised us to be huge advocates for the LGBT community because she said their rights are human rights. And if you want people to respect Indigenous rights, women's rights, you have to respect, people with disabilities. All the rights are important, right? Because we're all together. And I always carried that with me, was that it's true. You don't pick and choose which rights you abuse and which rights some people do, but I choose not to. And, I like how you say you almost have to take your own little piece of the pie, or whatever that is. So if I'm in sport, it could be in politics, it could be in your church, it could be in your faith community. It takes one person. And I was there this summer. Did you do that big walk? We did that big walk from the island. And I remember walking with my daughter, who was 5 years old. I wanted her to participate in it. Because, she didn't understand. She wanted to learn about this reconciliation thing. So I thought, what better way than to just come on this walk with Mom? And as we were walking into the final place where the Ville, I was going to say the Ville de Montréal, but it's actually the City Hall in Ottawa. And it was the last place where they're having the big event. There was one man standing there, and he had a sign, and he said, "Catholics for Reconciliation." And he just stood there very quietly, and everybody walked around him. And I thought, what courage. Like, he knows that his church and his faith had a part to play, but he wanted to be there. And I said to my daughter, I said, that's courage. He's a Catholic. He's proud of it. He's proud of his faith. And he wanted to make it right. And courage, your courage to address your issues and your courage to be here today, your courage to, be the guiding light for all of us and to raise your beautiful daughters to carry on that mantle is something that I commend you for. And I just think we're living in a day where we think that the superheroes are all you see on the movies, but no, they're real life and they're walking. So I want to thank you very much, and I want to thank everybody for coming here. And I'm going to teach you one word Mohawk. Ganarunkwa. Okay, so when you say to someone, I love you, you say, Ezo ganarunkwa. Ezo ganarunkwa. And I say, I give you big positive energy. And that's how, and ganarunkwatsara is the word for power of love. And that's the basis for everything that we have in this world is love. And I agree with you. Thank you very much.
I'm just doing a time check here in terms of questions. Are we going to do any? Or are we going to? No? Okay. I'm looking at my watch that has a dead battery on it, so it's not much help. I really wanted to thank my father and Wanique for sharing some of their stories and some of their understandings of reconciliation. I think the biggest, there's two common themes that we're hearing throughout here. Number one is this idea of love and courage. And sometimes for us, especially as an intergenerational family member, those are the hardest things to reach out for, is to have some courage and faith in humanity and faith in our fellow human beings. And so it really takes that courage to reach out, to do those handshakes, to give a hug. If any of you knew me before I started this journey of reconciliation, I'm extremely introverted. And I'd always be sitting there, and I've got the lines to prove it. Sitting over on the side going, I don't know, not much trust there, from where I came from. And I started reaching out. And my dad's always talking about reconciliation. And I'm kind of like, yeah, nice theory, Don't know how that's going to work out in real life, but... And so he started challenging me. And one of the things I heard actually from one of my nieces was that reconciliation is about courage. It's about the courage to take those risks to express our love for one another and our love for ourselves. And to have some faith that despite where we've come from, we have something to offer humanity. I'm never going to be like my father. I'm going to be like me. My introverted, strategic, intellectual, kind of frowny self. With some rays of laughter that come through every now and then. And a real developing joy in hugging other people. For a short while. So I really appreciate everybody's being here, and I hope you heard the second message, that each of us has a role to play in this, and that reconciliation isn't about changing the other person, that before we change the other person, something happens inside of us, and we heard Dr. Bernice King talk about that. That in trying to do this work, something just changes inside you, and you start believing in yourself again. And you start believing in the purpose. We start believing in our connection to one another. And so I genuinely appreciate your coming out here this evening. I want to make sure I thank our sponsors and our partners in this event, SFU Woodwards, SFU's Vancity Office for Community Engagement, SFU Public Square, and the SFU Beedie School of Business. I also really want to acknowledge that the work of Reconciliation Canada, we're a small but mighty team, but we're a small but mighty team that's lifted up by an amazing network of volunteers. So you'll see them in the room here with their blue t-shirts on. I really want to acknowledge the volunteers because that's how that walk happened.